Dobro veče. Dobro veče svima. Dobrodošli na događaj koji organizuje energetska zadruga Elektropionir. Moje ime je Ana Đokić. Ovde nas ima nekoliko iz Elektropionira. Predrag Momčilović je ovde sa mnom. Mi smo danas ovde i organizujemo događaj koji je pod krovom Solar tehnike narodu, koji je kurs koji Elektropionir organizuje po 7. put. Naš kurs je nazvan Solar tehnika narodu zato što ima njegov osnovni cilj da u stvari proširi ideje obnovljivih izvora energije, posebno solarne energije, na građane, kako građani mogu da budu deo energetske tranzicije, uključujući u demokratske procese proizvodnje energije, demokratizaciju procesa proizvodnje električne energije. I naših prvih 6 edicija kursa je bilo uglavnom posvećeno prozumerima, odnosno građanima kao pojedincima, i lako smo počeli da uvodimo organizovanje kroz same zadruge, odnosno udruživanje ljudi kako bismo zajedno proizvodili energiju. I ova 7. solar tehnika je u stvari s jedne strane nastala kao neka vrsta edukativnog procesa za nas same, kao energetsku zadrugu, u smislu da bismo proširili naša znanja i počeli polako da dovodimo goste i teme koje su važne za naš razvoj energetske zadruge i da bismo zajedno povukli drugi ljudi ili da se priključe nama ili da pokrenu nove energetske zajednice ili energetske zadruge. Nama je danas u gostima Mark Lantli. Mark dolazi iz nekoliko organizacija. Prvenstveno je ovde najavljen kao direktor, odnosno jedan od direktora Energy4All, koja je krovna organizacija 33 energetske zadruge iz Velike Britanije. Inače, Mark je i direktor, odnosno jedan od članova uprave Windmills Wind, koja je zadruga koja je vlasnica i osnivač ove velike vetroparka koji se nalazi na ovoj fotografiji, i takođe je deo druge zadruge koja je postavila ove solarne panele koje ovde vidite. Mark je inače i u upravnom odboru RES-a, krovne organizacije energetskih zadruga iz Evrope, i takođe je jedan od članova organizacije koja je pokrenula neku vrstu zadružnog fonda za finansiranje projekata energetskih zadruga širom Evrope, gde, da kažem, naprednije ili starije energetske zadruge pomažu projekte koji su negde na početku. Marka smo upoznali prošle godine kada smo bili na skupu RES-a u Atini, i od tada smo u jako dobrim odnosima. Neki od naših predstavnika su bili u Britaniji prošle jeseni na njihovom godišnjem skupu Energy4All, i ovo je sada prilika da napravimo neku vrstu razmene, i zato smo Marka pozvali i on je velikodušno prihvatio da stvarno na volonterskoj bazi dođe i ovde sa nama održi ovu današnju radionicu, predavanje, i sutra u stvari ćemo imati neku vrstu interne edukacije sa njim gde ćemo proći kroz to šta Elektropionir sada trenutno radi. Ovaj razgovor, odnosno ovo predavanje smo zamislili kao neku vrstu inspiracije, tako smo da Marku dali zadatak da napravi inspirativno predavanje koje u stvari na neki način da zainteresuje ljude da se udružuju sa nama ili sami pokrenu nešto zajedno. Nije toliko namenjen za pojedince koji žele baš da postave na svoj krov malu solarnu elektranu, nego više kako udružiti snage kroz energetske zadruge. Mark, I have made a lengthy introduction and I would like to invite you please to come here. I would like to thank in front of everyone for really kindly joining us on a volunteer basis to spend here a few days with us and share your extensive experience with us. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to stand up. Is that going to mess up your camera? I hope not. I am so pleased to be here. Thank you, Avala. I've been made hugely welcome. I think what Elektropionir are doing is inspiring. It is as inspiring, more inspiring than many other co-ops because it's at the start, it's the most challenging bits of it. So, as you might say, I don't want to sound too old, huge respect for what's happening. So thank you. So that's my first slide. I've got a few slides. I did a talk earlier with lots of practical things. I'm just going to show some pictures and tell a few stories. And they are almost all from my own personal picture collection. So there you go. So this is my first story. Of course, we've already just had that picture, but this is my first argument. An energy transition needs citizens at its heart. You could build an energy transition with a bunch of nuclear power stations funded by overseas money, and citizens just pay for it. That's not the sort of model, sorry, hold it closer. That's not the sort of model I'm going to try and argue for. I'm arguing for a model where citizens actually understand, so they're not just passive consumers, they're owners, they understand where their energy comes from, they have control over it. And so here are two pictures. The first one, for some of you have already seen this picture, is Westmill. So it's in Oxfordshire, so it's in the south of England, on a fairly rare sunny day. And that is a group of us when we had, on our first annual meeting of the solar project, and we had bought this £15 million project, one of the first of its type in the UK. And we had bought the project from the developer. And it was super stressful. In the earlier talk, I talked about some of the difficulties of it, so I won't go over that again. But just to say, it's actually not that easy to buy a solar park that's very profitable from people who don't want to sell it to you, but have signed a contract to get it with the landowner that says they will sell it to the community within a year. So we had a year to get the money together. £15 million, which was quite difficult. So that is a joyful picture. And the people right in the middle, you can just see them. The woman in yellow and the guy also in sort of mustard is the landowner and organic farmer who really made both projects work and was a sort of driving force and really interested in doing stuff that wasn't just about making the most money for his farm, but actually doing stuff that meant that this solar park had 1,600 local people being part of it and raising the money, and the wind farm had 2,400 people, 2,200 of which 15 years later are still members. It's quite something. And the picture on the right is an even rarer sunny day in Edinburgh. So those of you who've been to Edinburgh, well, there you go. And that is a school. It's one of the Edinburgh schools, and when that was the first project, and so the school kids obviously got together, and we got a bunch of sunflowers, and there's a couple of them. I think there's a head teacher, and then we've got these gigantic sunglasses to celebrate this project, which was a project where the local authority agreed with us that rather than them just put the panels on the school, they would work with the community would raise the money, and the council would give us their roofs for a rent. They get paid, but they would allow us to put solar panels on their roof. We would get a return, they would buy the electricity, and we would also have much greater benefits in terms of building that into the education program, so that the children understand not just about green energy, but also understand about different models of ownership. So it's this idea of transition and citizens at its heart. So, and the second sort of point I wanted to talk about is that of cooperation. And I guess it's this idea that it's not just climate change that is one of our challenges. We are overshooting so many of the planetary boundaries that we face in terms of biodiversity, in terms of wildlife loss, in terms of space for animals. In Oxford, I guess many of you will know this, there's an academic called Kate Raworth who has written the book, and the idea of an inner ring, because in spite of all that, so many people across the world don't meet minimum standards of health, of hygiene, of lifestyle, of warmth, of energy. So there's an inner ring which we want all citizens to meet, and there's an outer ring which the planet cannot sustain. So somebody said, well, that looks like a donut. So hence the phrase donut theory. And that is the ResCoop logo for our business plan. Because I said, we were all elected 3 years ago, and I said, what are we going to try and achieve over the next 3 or 4 years? So we set it all out, and that is, you can sort of see there, but it's got the cooperative principles, and you'll see there's citizens, so there's the democracy there's all sorts of different housing and windmills and whatever, and it's a donut. So that's there. And just as another example, this is the roof. You can see it's in London, because if you look in the distance, you can see the spires of the City of London, one of the richest parts of Western Europe. And that is in Brixton, which is, was for many years one of the poorest parts of Britain. So probably 5-6 kilometres away from the city centre. And it's an area where there's a lot of public housing. And this co-op is called Brixton Energy, obviously. And they are a small co-op, and they work with the local authority. And they put solar panels on public council housing. Usually when they're renovating the building, they have to replace the roof, so they put solar panels on it. And what they do is, in an area of high unemployment, they make sure that the people who are trained to do it are people from the area who become apprentices, or in this case, graduate apprentices, and then learn to actually put up more solar panels for other communities. So the community benefit they have provided is they've said, we want to train the citizens in our area so that they can actually earn a living from doing this sort of work. And then I thought I should just talk a little bit. My third talk is about this is a less interesting slide, but I thought I'd put it in as I am from Energy4All. So it's just, Westmill I talked about is, it's right down here. It's one of the bottom of the tree. And we built this tree, and the idea is each one of those is an independent co-op within Energy4All. So each co-op has gradually built, and each year the tree gets bigger. In fact, we've added another 2 or 3 leaves to it in the last year. And I think I might just touch on that. And I sort of did this as an idea. I always like to think in circles. I'm always adding this in. And I was trying to describe Energy4All. What is Energy4All? And why is it different from something else? So if you start on the top right, we help individual communities to develop projects. And I was talking earlier about, quite often, you're a community group and you've got this great idea. And if you're like us, you make a shed load of mistakes because you've never done it before. So you make mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake. If you're lucky, you still get through. Of course, at the end of that, you think, well, I know how to do it now, but you haven't got another project. So Energy4All said, well, we've done that now. Why don't we help the next communities do that sort of thing? So sort of the Elektropionir model. So we help other co-ops now raise funds through share offers. So we've worked out how to write share offers. I was I did talk about that earlier, actually, and I can give you a few anecdotes about share offers if you tempt me. So then we helped the project get built, and that's actually, not easy. Raising money is hard. Building the thing to time, to budget, technically and everything is also quite difficult. So and we charge a fee, and then we help them manage the project, because building it is only half the challenge. You actually got to run the thing as well. But then if we just do that, we're just a classic developer. So what do? Every new co-op becomes an equal owner of Energy4All. So who's Energy4All owned by? It's owned by these leaves on this tree. So every year, the ownership structure gets a bit more complicated. And here is where they are, all around the UK. So there's a lot, you will work out, there's a lot more solar down in the south, and there's a lot more wind up in the north for fairly obvious reasons. The other thing is, you'll notice Scotland has got a lot of projects, and that's the effect of a sympathetic national government. And energy policy is a devolved matter in the UK. And the Scottish government, I've been in the earlier talk, I was incredibly rude about the Westminster government, and I completely forgot to say what a fantastic government in Scotland is, who have a load of policies that are as forward-looking as the Westminster government is hidebound and useless. So Scotland actually has a really brilliant policy called CARES, which gives communities loans, and if the project is successful, they pay the loan back on fair terms, and if the project doesn't work, it just becomes a grant and it gets written off. So that's how they help do it. So that's why there's a lot more projects in Scotland, and that has really helped the Energy4All projects in Scotland, because we've used the CARES project. Brilliant government. So I thought I am sort of sneaking in a few of the 7 cooperative principles. So this is Westmill, actually, again. Mostly just I've got a lot more pictures from them. And this is one of the regular schools programs. We've had about 15,000 visitors around the site now. We've created a charity. And we've shown people, we show schools around, we show interesting citizens, we show councillors, we've showed national MPs, journalists, we've shown academics from Korea and all sorts of different places. So, we have a big program. And we had a big open day, and the local school created, we had all these open tents, and the school created a frieze here with all the various renewable projects. And so it's a picture of this school frieze that they created and built for us for the event. And we have an education program. So if you're at all interested, the charity, which is called WeSet, has developed a whole free education program for teachers. It is unfortunately in English, but they're called lesson plans. They're done by teachers, so you can actually just pick them up and use them in school classes. So they're used quite widely across the UK. So education is something that we put a lot of emphasis on the Energy4All family. And of course we generate energy. We generate about 10 gigawatts a year of wind in a windy year, if the turbines are working. And one year we celebrated this with what we regarded as the world's largest turbine hugging photo. So this is a turbine hugging. Of course, Adam did make it look like the C&D sort of thing as well. You can see the C&D sort of thing there. So that was taken from another turbine. And that is one of our slightly wacky tractors and vans. And we have a really interesting group of people, and that's the tent where the earlier photo was taken. And I think that was the year that we were doing this presentation. We had a really senior person from the climate change movement talking, whose name's gone out of my mind, unfortunately, for a second. But anyway, he's really well known. And a journalist, and he's there, and we've got all the cameras. It's like this, really professionally done, cameras all the way down. And the lights go out. Oh, God, what's happened? And so I'm chairing it. So I'm standing here. The mic's gone off. There's 200 people in the audience. What on earth do I say? And somebody comes racing in and says, you've got to thank X. And the lights came back on. And it turned out it was this ridiculous battery-powered milk float that he'd plugged in to repower the entire presentation. So milk float in the UK, you used to deliver milk in glass bottles with these battery-powered vehicles in the 1960s that ran at about 15 kilometers an hour, 18 if it was going downhill. So he had this old milk float that he used for demonstrations. And somebody had run over, one of those tractors had run over one of the cables and had shorted the power into the whole system. He plugged his milk float in. So we ran the rest of the conference on the milk float. So energy. We generate 12 gigawatts from the wind and about 4.5 gigawatts from solar, gigawatt hours a year. And across the whole family now, it's in the annual report. I've forgotten. But so there's energy, and there's sort of the broader benefits. I want to talk about transparency and openness. Here's a picture of us voting. We're all looking pretty serious, I think. And 2 or 3 of those people went on to become directors, and my wife is somewhere in the back there. And I said about the story that we had 15,000 people. We knew that we were at 9,900 and something. So we knew in this event the 10,000th person to the site would arrive. So we were counting them in. So literally counting them in. And so this couple, I think I got it the wrong way. She's an English woman, and that is her Dutch husband, who was slightly stunned. We clapped into the place. So you are the 10,000th visitor. And we all gave them a great big cheer. So, and in fact, we did a video the next year, and she was talking on that. So there's a few videos that we've done, so you can see about what we've done. And the democracy is quite important to us. So there are 2,200 members of the Wind now. And, the easiest thing with a co-op is just to sort of say, we're going to run the AGM, we'll make it as easy as possible, it's all online, and, if people turn up, that's great, and if we get through it all in an hour, that's fine. And we have absolutely not done that. We try and get brilliant, interesting people to speak at the annual meeting, and I have to say every year it gets a bit harder. But we get really interesting people. We write to our members constantly. We encourage them to come. My letters get ever more elaborate to get people to come. But people have a great time, and we have this metric. We have to get at least 100 people to our AGMs in person. So this year it's being done at a fantastic education place called Farm Ed, which you'll see a picture of in a minute or two, which is one of the leading biodiversity education centres in which we help grant fund. And so the inspirational leader of that is actually going to be doing talks about agriculture and whatever, and probably some of our grant funding will go into that. So the democracy is really important about how we actually do that. And it would be so easy otherwise just to sort of pay lip service to it. So it's important that we don't. We really do something. And so here is community. And we were talking earlier, all these things are in tension. You could just be incredibly community focused, but if you don't look at the finances, then you'll sort of really be in trouble. And if you only look at finances, you don't look at education, you're not really adding a lot. So these things are all in creative tension here. So this is community. So again, these are just really shameless examples for me to give you a series of sort of interesting sunny pictures. So this is Root and Branch on the left there, which is an education charity. I can't claim credit for it. It's actually run by the farmer landowner. And that is a program that helps people with mental disability learn and actually learn skills by working in land on agriculture and actually horticulture. And so we do help support that. And so there's some of the projects. And the education thing there's a bike. You have to pedal very hard to light a light bulb is the key message of the bike, actually. So energy is very hard to generate. And, you know, and here are, this is sort of to do with art. This was, I think, at the celebration, those are the Westmill singers. So it's actually a green left group who've grown out of the woodcraft folk, and they came and did this song when we were doing one of the fundraising exhibitions. So it's a sort of a bit of a sort of sign that we remain slightly radical as well as sort of trying to be part of the family. And I talked earlier about biodiversity and the other climate boundaries that we press against. And there are some people who are very nervous of solar farms. And they say, well, that's land that could be used for growing food. And that's self-evidently true. The farm itself was fairly low-grade land. So it was largely used for grazing. So it has been completely reseeded. And so it's wildflowers. And have I used that picture twice? Did I inadvertently? There you go. Well, anyway, it's a good picture of flowers as well as visitors. So I had a lot of other pictures of flowers I could have used, but I moved them around. So that, anyway, is a picture of the much of the biodiversity. And as I was explaining to some other people, we cut the seeds. Adam has a flock of sheep that come in, so we had to reclip all the electric cables to make sure they were out of range of the sheep as they come round. Otherwise, electric panels and sheep become a slightly unfortunate combination. So, and on the right is not Westmill, that's South Hill. That's just where I live. And in fact, that is the project developer of Energetskih of France and imaju. And that is a solar beehive. So they're developed, I think, in the Czech Republic. It might be in Slovenia. And one of the big problems with beekeeping is varroa mites that are parasites that kill bees. And the traditional way of dealing with them is to pump the bees' hives full of chemicals. So, you by then, when you eat honey, you're ingesting the chemicals that the bees have used. So this is a solar beehive. So it's there, and it's got wooden, it's open at the moment. So you can see there's a glass, that bit there is glass. And so you open up that, and on a sunny day, you do it 4 times a year, and it raises the temperature of the beehive. It raises it to 43 degrees centigrade. I am at risk of sounding as if I know more about this subject than I actually do, I should say. But anyway, 43 degrees kills the varroa mites. The bees will tolerate that temperature for a period. So it's there. Then you close it, and the temperature gradually drops. No varroa mite, not a lot of chemicals. So you end up with that. And I did try and bring it and failed because I remembered I was having to fly. But we do have both Westmill honey and South Hill honey. So how many power stations have their own honey supply? I would invite you to comment. So I should talk a little bit about art and fun. So these are serious things, but we try and do other things. This, sadly, is not Westmill. I'd love it to be Westmill. And for years, I've been going on about we should put artwork on the base of the turbines. For years, they keep saying, yes, we will, and no, they don't. But that is Findhorn in Scotland, in the very north of Scotland. It is an absolutely inspirational community. And I stayed there a few years ago, and so took these photos. And Findhorn is actually part of the Energy4All family. They were a eco-commune in the 1960s, and many of them were created. Very few of them survive. This one does, and it promotes peace negotiations. So that's one of their specialisms. and sustainable energy. They are the only part of the UK that has their own completely separate mini grid. So they have a battery and they have these 2 wind turbines and a nice piece of artwork. If you come to Westmill, and you are all warmly invited to Westmill, when you arrive, there are a series of poles outside. I should have taken a picture, but I couldn't find one. And they all hum. So Westmill has its own artwork, and that is a soundscape. So you can stand amongst the whole, and as the wind blows, each one has got a different chord. So the artwork sings to you depending on the different direction and speed of the wind. And there are some people who've said, can you hear that bloody wind turbine? We say, no, that's the art thing. So, and that there is, you can see we do have, it's not entirely just sort of talks and whatever. I don't know why, but there is always a bouncy castle. Whenever you do these things, there's always a bouncy castle. So Westmill is the home of bouncy castles. And we do partnerships. These are not Westmill ones, so these are 2. I showed you the picture of South Hill, which was with the Beehive, which is a different co-op. Actually, Westmill lent, because there is no CARES project in England, so Westmill did a sort of what I call a mini CARES. South Hill there, which is this co-op, it's a 4.2 megawatt solar project in the village which I live in. And it is interesting how you can see this sort of thing work. They all said, well, wait a minute, Westmill's done that. That's really good. We could have it here. And you do sort of see that sort of ripple out effect that happens, that if something's done in one place, people will sort of say, we could do that. So there's a sort of a power of the we could do that. So they say, well, we could do that. And the planners said no. They said, well, this is a site of special scientific interest, and you'll be able to see the turbines from, one tiny place. So they wanted invisible turbines. So we had another go, and Westmill lent them the money and said, we will make it a grant if you're not successful. So I think we lent £30,000, which allowed them to recruit a planning consultant. And then we also got all the village out with a series of umbrellas. So I'm somewhere in that picture, but anyway. And we all were told to hold the umbrellas at a certain height. Not exactly sure why. And then move 10 meters and stand again, and move 10 meters and stand again. We did it for about half an hour. And then they photoshopped it all together and said, because the umbrellas are at the same height as the solar panels. And then they superimposed the picture on the views and said, look, that's what it would look like. But of course, it also gave the message, and here's hundreds of the local people. So for you people objecting, here's the hundreds of people who are in favour of it. So it was a sort of, we did it for 2 or 3 reasons. And we converted it into a loan anyway. We converted the loan into a grant anyway, because we thought they'd worked so hard, and we couldn't really have the heart to ask the money back in the end, so we just wrote it off. And that is one of the schools co-ops, which is another one. And so we built 105 co-ops now, got another 10, 15 going. And this is an iconic site. It's Salisbury Cathedral. So it's a 1,000-year-old cathedral, something like that. I can't say that we put panels on the 1,000-old cathedral. You just can't do that in the UK. But they have allowed it to put it on the cathedral school. So it's pretty close to the cathedral. So, and it's a great picture. So that is another partnership. And it's, we've built the schools co-op now. So there's over 100 schools. And that's a really great example because, again, the school, there's hundreds of children go past each one of those. So you're talking about tens of thousands of people seeing the message of climate change and citizen ownership. So schools are a really great way of reaching a lot of people. And if you have teachers or advocates, teachers are the best people to present at any event because they have to present in front of children. And here I am presenting in front of a group of people who are sort of basically interested in what I have to say, and the teachers have to do it with children who just aren't interested in what they have to say. So, children, the best presenter ever was the teacher at one of our schools, the school co-ops, because she was just brilliant. Anyway. So I want to talk a little bit about other things we do. As I think I said, either on this talk or the other one, West Mill Solar is quite a lucrative co-op. So most of these projects, they're completely opaque in their finances. You have no idea how much money goes in, comes out. And we pay our members a slightly embarrassing 12% a year for this, which is far and above any other energy co-op. So in most of them around 4, so we pay 12. I'm always nervous we're going to get clobbered by the FCA for doing that, but we haven't so far. And we pay the pension fund that lent the money, the retail price index plus 3.5%. So that's been very, very good for the pension fund, but we'll leave that aside because that's another story. And we have paid £700,000 in community benefit so far. And we're paying another £700,000 as a result of the high energy prices as a result of the Ukraine conflict. And we took the view, we are not in the business of paying our members extra money because of the result of human suffering. So that is money that that's money we will try and use to alleviate other forms of suffering nearby. In fact, I sound like I've done all sorts of things, but one of the things I did design the grant program and then gave it to somebody else to do all the hard work, which is one of my usual tricks. But I had this idea of dropping a stone in a pond. So the first bit is the immediate community, and we have a grant program for the immediate community. And then we have an outer one, which is for the area, the Oxfordshire area. And then we have a national ring where we try and support climate change movements. And then I think there's an outer ring. So we support something called Renewable World, which puts solar panels on schools in 2 or 3 developing areas where particularly young girls are at risk of dropping out of school because there's no education, and there are problems with them if young women don't get education. That materially changes their life chances. So we don't give a huge amount, but we give money to that on the idea that it's helping renewable energy, which helps run the schools, which helps educate young women, which is making a change far away from us. So it's those concentric rings. And it looks like I might be doing another bit on it, so I might rejig the rings and put a bit more out that way. But this over here is actually Farm Ed, the project where we're going to have our AGM. And that is a polytunnel that we paid for because the local community supported agriculture, which is a green vegetable box scheme, which is organic and which teaches people how to grow food and understand where food comes from. And they've actually got 3 wind turbine polytunnels. One of them from Charlbury is called Charlie. This one is from Westmill, is called Westy, which is also a sort of type of dog. So, it's a sort of, it doesn't really work in Serbian, I think. And then there's another one as well, which I can't remember what it's called. But anyway, so we have helped grow that through this grant program. And there are other things. We've tried to do things that are slightly different. So there's a really interesting, I'll stop soon. Am I doing okay for time? Am I overrunning? There's a really great cider community-supported project. So cider, it's alcohol made out of apples. So they have the apples that fall and would otherwise rot, and they collect those, and they needed a cider press, as you would. So we funded the cider press. So somewhere between consumer-supported agriculture and cider press. And those are the people, we now sell our electricity for a co-op, but that was the co-op, that was the energy group, who were also fantastic, called Good Energy. which is an activist energy group, and they helped us, and so we gave them a great big shove at several of our conferences and encouraged our members to buy their electricity. And my feed-in tariff is still with good energy off my own house. And we do try and support activism. So we've been one of the key supporters and founders of Community Energy England, which is the representative organisation. That is Leo Murray. So he is the scourge of SUV drivers in central London. I think he's one of those ones who puts the lentils in the what would you call them? The you pump up tyres, so it lets the tyres. He's part of the tyre letdown group in central London. So he's a great speaker, actually. He also, Donald Trump, just after he was elected, toured London and Britain rather shamefully sort of, rolled out the red carpet for Trump. And he developed the blimp, the big balloon of Trump as a baby with the nappies. And the British Secret Service had to keeping Trump so he wouldn't see this huge balloon suspended just near the House of Parliament. So that's another one of Leo's sort of success stories. So he gave, and that was one of our AGMs. So he was the speaker at the AGM. So we tried, Leo was a good speaker. And that's just one of our flags, because we do try and support other groups. I think that was actually Adam's flag, actually. So it gives you an idea of the sort of organisation. And I thought I'd talk about money, but I talk about money in a different way. So my background is I was, you may have said this, but I used to be a finance director of a council, and so did lots of pretty serious stuff. But money is important, but you should be doing more than that. And in the UK, there's a big movement. And I've decided as I was sitting here, I was going to set you a challenge. So having said to Sasha, I'm not going to come and tell you what to do. I'm setting a possible idea because I think it'd be really fun. So fair tax grew out of the UK co-op movement. And the idea is people should pay the fair rate of tax. They shouldn't be using tax havens, paradis fiscaux in French, of which Britain has more than its fair share. But actually, we should be getting businesses to not only pay their tax, but be transparent about their financial management arrangements, to go far beyond the actual minimum. And so fair tax was created, and the two West Mills were one of the first 5 or 6 organisations in the UK to actually join the fair tax. It's now got hundreds. The two West Mills did it, and so Energy4All sort of, by this time, felt they really had to follow the two West Mills. So Energy4All's done it. There is now an international fair tax. The Netherlands and Germany and whatever, I just put it to you that it would be quite fun if one of the Serbian energy co-ops was right in there with an early fair tax sort of thing. I just leave that with you if you ever thought about it. They're a really nice group, and it's not that hard to do. And what might the future look like? I have got one slide after this. This is C-Coop. One of the challenges, I think, certainly in the Westminster government, is they want to keep the energy system, basically say, yeah, there's community energy, it's a little village hall with maybe a solar panel, and we keep everybody busy doing that. If you were to talk to the likes of Dirk van Singen in Belgium, they want to change the energy system. They want actually to re-engineer it, that citizens have a big part of it. They're looking at the likes of Schönau in Germany, who bought their own grid to discover it was in a bit of a state. But, or looking at what Copenhagen and Middelgrunden have done, where they created their own joint offshore wind project. So that then, when in the UK, we're in the process of doing 4 offshore wind projects with our developer called Folk Energy Renantes. And they said, we can't do it. Nobody's ever done it. And we said, well, just look at Denmark. And of course, the people saying this were Danish. So of course they knew. They just assumed we wouldn't know. They assumed we didn't talk to each other. That is Seacoop. That's the Belgian co-op where they're looking to create, I'm going to get it wrong, I think it's 200 million. 200 million, raise 200 million to then borrow a lot more. So it's quite an ambitious project. I've suddenly got louder, I hope, but this is the next slide. And I'm very aware I'm standing between you and the food at the back there. So I'll be, so I know the longer the food's there, the less your interest will be. So I just wanted to show you this picture. You've seen her already. That's Maya Guiu from Energetskih. That is Dirk van Singen and Daan Kreupelstad from Belgium. That is Stan. Stan is French, and you will observe that Stan didn't pack enough clothes that day for the event. And there are Spanish people and Wallonian. There's another Brit there, and another French person, Julien Noy, at the end. And Julien Noy helped create the French telecoms co-op and is the founder of something called Energie partagée in France, which is, it translates as shared energy. So it's a group of us there, and we were in the process of creating something called MISIs, Mobilizing European Citizens in favor of supporting energy, sustainable energy. And it was a really difficult morning. I'd love to say that you all get, it doesn't really matter, but the French people hadn't done what they said they were going to do. And Karel, who's the really tall guy, because he's Belgian, he got really, really angry. And so we went out to walk just to sort of chill out. And we stood there, and somebody said, we'll take a photo. And I, rather clowningly, said, oh, it's all EU funded. We're all pointing in different directions. So we're all pointing in different directions. If you look, everybody's finger is pointing somewhere else. I didn't know at that point that we would be pointed in a completely different direction, but that's another story. Anyway, so there we all are, citizens of Spain, France, Belgium, Netherlands, Britain, the United States, the rescue policy director there, Josh, is American. And that's right on the French, so it's just on the Belgian-German border. So here we all are, a group of people from across a lot of different countries, arguing but trying to work together. And, 80 years ago, young people of that age were fighting and dying. So that's what we're trying to do. We are trying to create something that's more than just energy and democracy. It is actually, and I speak as somebody who's part of a country that's walked away from international solidarity, it is about solidarity and cooperation and collaboration. So it's important at the individual level, but it's also important at the macro level. And so I just finish by inviting people to say, we've shown my two favorite pictures. The picture of us celebrating Westmill and the picture of us exhausted after a day creating MISIs. And I would normally just stop there, but if I can give you another 30 seconds, because it sort of comes round. So this pension fund, I was involved creating a national government financing agency at the time, which is a long and boring story, which I won't go into. But as a result, I knew quite a few people who were involved in the local government pension scheme. And so the really lovely woman, Jill Kilpatrick, who was the finance director at Lancashire County Council, one of the biggest councils. And she was the leading person in Lancashire Pension Fund. And so they were interested and they became investors in Westmill. As I explained, they were the lenders. So they lent the £12 million, which with the £5 million allowed us to buy the solar project. Our National Finance Ministry, Treasury, in their infinite wisdom, decided they could save money by compressing all these 89 local government pension funds into 6 super pools. That would save, as they saw it, all this cumbersome local democracy. And instead, they would be managed by professional managers, people, who get paid serious salaries to do this. And so that's what's happened. And so Lancashire has become LPPI. And LPPI never make now direct investments. They only invest, as I've explained, through a series of managers and fund managers and sub-fund managers and sub-sub-fund managers. So I have not got the energy or enthusiasm, but I would lay good money it hasn't actually saved any money at all. All it's done is move where the administration costs have gone from running several funds to paying a lot of well-paid fund managers. But anyway, so LPPI have given, this isn't public yet, so you're all sworn to secrecy here. So LPPI gave the offer to Westmill, which we chair, a shed load of money, £1.8 million bonus if we would release them from this loan that is paying them about 13%. So you basically, for those amongst you, if you try and get out of a loan where you're paying people a lot of interest, they never let you out of a loan like that. You have to pay them. And they were offering to pay us. So it was too good an opportunity for us to say no. And we could just have gone to a bank. But actually, I have to admit, it makes it sound like I'm always scheming and plotting. But I was talking to Carol, a bloke there, and I said, well, the problem with MeSize is we're always coming up with really rubbish loans and asking it to start off with that. We need to find a really brilliant loan that nobody will say no to. And then, of course, Lancashire turned around and said, well, we'd like our money back. I said, well, I think I've got the project. So we have stitched together now, hopefully to go live, touch wood, hopefully to go live probably in the next 2 to 3 weeks, that EcoPower and Energie and Courant Air and Bergen Energy and Rescoop itself and Westmill and a couple of others together through MeSize are going to refinance Westmill Solar. They'll take the LPPI money out, and Westmill Solar, the bank balance of it will be funded now by a group of the biggest energy co-ops across Europe. And with the surplus from that and the repayments from that, we can then kickstart another European project. So let's hope. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Would you have time for a few questions or remarks of the audience?
People are prepared to forgo the delicious-looking food at the end. I'm more than happy to delay you from your food.
Stevan.
I have a question related to the slide that you presented earlier in the presentation. You mentioned that you built on council-owned rooftops. And I wondered if I'm not mistaken, you basically just lease the rooftops,
Yeah.
Is that the only model of a partnership with a local council?
No.
Is there, because I think for us it will be useful to find out how we can diversify, how we can pitch to local governments who own quite attractive rooftops.
Well, that's a very, very astute question. So we have a couple of models, but first off, the Edinburgh, because I usually talk about schools co-op, where it's actually often individual schools or networks of schools. So it's not actually usually the local authority. Edinburgh was the first local authority that we did this joint venture with. And of course, the councils turn around and say, well, we've got TUPE and OJU rules that we have to go through, public procurement rules. So we can't just give you this. Fine, we said. Let's do an OJU program. And we actually learned this from Bath and West, an independent, so they'd done this before. So it's an example of, so this wasn't Energy4All leading, we were learning from another one. So we suggested to Edinburgh that they ran an ODU competition. They asked people to bid. And I have to say, as an ex-finance director, the councillors got it all. The finance director and the director of legal service were about as unhelpful as it was possible to be. They obstructed all the way through, and but the councillors pushed it through. And right at the last minute, so we did this tender, and the tender was structured so that there was price, but there was also quality, and the quality was stuff like education and all the things that we've talked about. And right at the last minute, the finance director said, we said, of course, to the leader of the council, you know, this is really financially advantageous. We could do this, and the money would go direct to support council coffers. So we thought, we're sunk. And the council leader turned round to the finance director and said, why haven't you done that already? And of course the answer was, because they're all too busy and they never got round to doing these things. So that was the model. And so then it's a leasing model, and I've said, if you want to see the sort of the leases, they're actually licenses we use for reasons I don't fully understand. So that is the one model that we've done, and there are a couple of examples around the UK that are like that. We've got another one in Reading, where it's the Reading Council, and it's actually other local authorities around have joined. So there are a couple of regional ones. And then just recently, I don't think it's on the tree yet, it'll be this year, it's a project called North Lincolnshire Energy, where again it's council sites, but there the council's also putting money in as well. So it's investing some of its own money alongside citizens' money and roofs. And they have a joint member. So the board of the co-op actually has nominations from the council and nominations from the other parts of the co-op as well. So we've started developing that sort of model. It's also a model that it doesn't just have to be councils actually. We also have a model that's called Marks & Spencer's Energy. And so Marks & Spencer's, a former chain of shops in the UK, had something called Plan A, which is their environmental program. It's called Plan A because there's no Plan B. And they, as a result, supermarkets and shops use an awful lot of electricity during the day with chiller cabinets, so they worked out that they could put solar panels on their roofs. They identified 20 roofs that we could do it. By the time we did the surveys, only 7 roofs were good enough to put the solar panels on. So it's a smaller co-op than it might have otherwise been. But yeah, you know, so the model also works actually with other sorts of organisations. And I'll just say it for a bit of interest. You've just reminded me. Oxfordshire did a very similar thing and went to all the local employers to try and find roofs. And they also do school roofs. And the one thing they learned was almost always going to national organisations in the UK, I don't know if it's the same, was just a waste of time, because usually they didn't own the buildings. The buildings had been somewhere else. So that's why we've never done it with a health authority, because the health authorities, the buildings are owned by one, and it's the operator and the building owner. But it's independent, family-owned, ethical businesses are quite often up for it. So there was in Oxford, the local bus company said, well, we've got a big roof, there's buses underneath it. So, and they've now gone down a route actually of doing a lot of stuff to do with greening their bus fleet as well. And they have electric buses in Oxford. And so you can see how those things also affect those things. That's a long answer to a simple question about different models. Mm-hmm.
Hello. Thank you for the very interesting presentation. I would like to know a bit more about your community engagement strategies. Like, I don't know if there is a typical profile of a member in your communities. Yes. Yeah, and if you have any strategies in including in having equal participation across gender or age, also ethnicity. I find that rather tricky. I'm Ioanna. I work for Energy4All. It's an energy cooperative in Greece. I recently started to work there, and I think this is one of the great challenges.
It's a really good question. I think one of the biggest challenge. I think one of the. I think we could do more, particularly in issues to do with ethnicity. So if you look at our pictures, they're overwhelmingly white people. That's because they're either in Scotland or they're in the countryside. So most of the urban areas are where people from different backgrounds live. And it's interesting that Brixton Energy actually do have people from a lot of different backgrounds. We have, and one of the problems, the biggest actually issue in terms of diversity for our co-ops, and I think many co-ops, because I've discussed this at Rescue, is age. If we did a survey of Westmill wind and solar members, half of them are aged over 65. When I joined, this is a bit sad, when I joined the Westmill board, I was the youngest member of the board. And you know where this story is going. I'm now the oldest member of the board. So I am now 60, almost 64. And, you know, like, sort of, so I am hitting that bloody demographic. I try as a chair, we have a brilliant board, so the great news is I don't have to worry about some things. One thing I do try and do, and sometimes I'm accused of being a bit over-controlling on it, actually, is to try and get a diverse board. So we have people in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And so that's one sort of dimension. The other dimension is I do have to have, I think, we try and do really interesting, radical things, but that also means your intention. You really have to have a professional board as well. So we have somebody there who's the head of wind generation. He's now actually the head of wind generation in Lithuania. And yes, he joins the calls on Zoom from Lithuania these days. And then we've got a French accountant, and we've got and we have a gender balance that's sort of 60-40 men women, so it's not even. But we also have made a definite effort and we do have somebody who's just about to join the board who's not sort of from a white background, is from a South Asian background, and she should join in June. And I have avoided doing this sort of thing of having a youth representative. I'm not very keen on that. We have a director who is a lead director who has key responsibilities and who is 21. And she wrote, I shared all the sort of schools co-op stuff. She is one of the people who works actually for the installers who does that. And she programs the schools co-op, and she's on the schools co-op, and she's an incredibly energetic person. She's a full board member. So I suppose the one thing I'd say in terms of diversity is my counsel would not be to have the youth member or a member from somebody else just actually say, we're going to get a diverse board. Right.
Any more questions? Mark, I wanted to ask you something personal before we end. You have been a financial director of the city of Oxford.
Yeah.
How did you make a shift to do this?
Goodness, Now, I could give a facile answer, but I'll give an honest answer, if I may. So, and it's quite a serious answer. So when I joined Oxford City, so I was probably in my early 40s, and I'd been a deputy director in a very remote part of the UK, the Western Isles. And this was a job I'd done a whole series of jobs. I'd been a trainee, I'd been a qualified auditor, then I'd been a audit manager in Kensington and Chelsea, a well-known borough. Then I'd become the head of finance policy, and then I'd become head of finance and audit, and I led a whole series of really serious, high-profile fraud investigations in London, which was super stressful. And then I went to the most remote parts of the UK and became deputy director of finance in a very remote place. Everybody thought I was mad. We stayed there 4 years, and then I came down to Oxford. So I've got this, classic local government career. And Oxford was one of the worst run, or seen as one of the worst run, councils in the UK. It had had its accounts qualified for 7 years. That's just really not very good, actually. So, when the auditor said we don't trust these accounts, when I arrived, it had a 20% budget deficit. We cut the council's spending by 25%, so it was a brutal, horrible period when we went through. So I was hugely unpopular, and I was the finance director. I was the finance director for several years, and then seen as the future chief executive of the city council. So it's all going really well. I'll cut it short, but anyway, the long and short of it was, I went from being the future chief executive, applied for the job, didn't get it, and was fairly shortly unemployed. And then I got another job as a finance director representing all of local government. But in the meantime, two things happened. The first one was I started getting involved. I helped create a credit union, Oxfordshire Credit Union, in my spare time, and also joined the board of Westmill and oversaw the construction of Westmill. And then when I was at the LGA, Local Government Associations, their head of finance, I helped the solar project go forward. And at the same time, I had two really quite close friends and I had never led this finance director lifestyle. So I'd sort of been becoming quite aware of a difference. And so we lived in a small house in Oxford. All my peers lived in these huge, mega mansion places and drove expensive cars, and we drove a Prius and cycled. And so when I got to the LGA and I'd done this bonds agency work, and two of my friends who were doing the same sort of thing died in their 40s, and it just became really apparent that sort of mentality of working huge hours for a future that might or might not arrive, earning money for which most people wanted to put in status goods, was more and more in conflict with the issues of climate change and climate breakdown, which I increasingly saw as much more important than my personal progression. So when I left the LGA, I worked out that I could live on what I'd saved, and I could do the things I thought was important. And so that's what I did. And as a result, I worked with incredible people, fantastic people. I still earn a bit. I don't earn a tenth of what I used to earn. But we'd saved money, we paid off our mortgage, and I just decided I would do things, and that I was saying to somebody in the break, I'm in my 60s. So some people say, my mother says, I should slow down. And I say, I don't have 40 years ahead of me. If I'm going to get stuff done, you need to get it done now. So I'm sort of racing around doing different things. So there you go. That's a fairly long answer, sorry.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, really, for this inspiring talk, for the also really personal story sharing with us. I think that we really need people like you from the high positions and from the knowledge that would be brought into cooperatives, because in that way we can grow and be more serious. So I encourage everyone here in the audience who has this sort of knowledge also to try to share it with the cooperatives or become members of cooperatives. Thanks a lot. And we have now some food that has arrived in the back, and I would like to thank Belgrade Open School, who has supported also to have this sort of small feast after this.